Dog saves lost child from forest. What happens when family finds out will shock you. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The forest was dense, its towering trees forming a labyrinth of shadows and light. The leaves whispered secrets as a gentle breeze wove through the undergrowth. Somewhere deep within this natural maze, the sound of hurried, uneven footsteps broke the serene silence. A small figure, barely visible through the thick brush, stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. It was Emily, a 5-year-old girl who had wandered too far from her family during their afternoon picnic. Her vibrant red jacket stood out starkly against the greens and browns of the forest, a beacon of vulnerability in the sprawling wilderness. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her tiny hands trembling. Fear clung to her like the damp air around her, and each rustling leaf seemed to echo with unseen dangers. Emily had been chasing a butterfly, its wings shimmering like jewels in the sunlight. She had giggled as it flitted just out of reach, leading her deeper and deeper into the woods. But now the butterfly was gone, and so was the familiar sight of her parents. She turned in circles, her breath hitching as she realized she had no idea which way to go. "Mommy," she called out, her voice wavering. "Daddy." Only the forest answered, its sounds indifferent to her pleas. The towering trees and tangled bushes seemed to close in around her, their shadows stretching like grasping hands. Panic set in, her small chest rising and falling rapidly as she hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter. Miles away, Duke, a golden Labrador with a heart as big as his sturdy frame, trotted through the forest. Duke belonged to the Reynolds family, who lived on the edge of the woods in a cozy cabin. The Labrador was well known in the area for his sharp instincts and gentle demeanor. He often accompanied Mr. Reynolds on hunting trips, his nose keenly attuned to the scents of the forest. Today, however, Duke was restless. His tail wagged with purpose as he sniffed the air, his ears perking up at every sound. Something was off, though he couldn't quite place it. His sharp nose caught a faint, unfamiliar scent, a mixture of fear and salt, like tears. Duke's instincts flared, and he changed direction, his powerful legs carrying him toward the source of the scent. As he moved deeper into the woods, the scent grew stronger, mingled now with the faintest trace of fabric and soil. Duke's brown eyes scanned the underbrush, his ears twitching at the soft sound of sobbing. He pushed through a cluster of ferns and stopped, his gaze falling on the small, trembling figure of Emily. The child looked up, her tear-streaked face pale with fear. For a moment, she froze, unsure of whether the large dog was a friend or foe. Duke, sensing her hesitation, wagged his tail gently and let out a soft whine, his posture low and unthreatening. He took a cautious step closer, his eyes warm and kind. "Doggy," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Duke let out another soft whine, his tail wagging faster. He approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Emily watched him, her grip on her stuffed rabbit loosening slightly. When Duke reached her, he nuzzled her hand with his wet nose, his warm breath brushing against her skin. The little girl's fear began to ebb, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. She reached out tentatively, her small fingers brushing against Duke's fur. The Labrador sat down beside her, his body a solid presence of comfort and reassurance. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm lost," she whispered. "I don't know where Mommy and Daddy are." Duke seemed to understand. He let out a low bark, a sound of determination. He stood up and nudged Emily gently, urging her to follow. The little girl hesitated, her legs shaky from exhaustion, but the Labrador's unwavering presence gave her the strength to stand. Meanwhile, back at the picnic site, chaos reigned. Emily's parents, Sarah and Tom, were frantic. They had searched every corner of the meadow where they had set up their picnic, calling out her name until their voices were hoarse. The other families nearby joined a search, their voices echoing through the woods as they combed the area. "Emily," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking with desperation. "Emily, where are you?" Tom clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to think rationally, but the image of his little girl lost and scared in the vast forest clouded his thoughts. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, and the shadows in the forest grew longer and darker. "We need to call the authorities," Tom said, his voice tight with worry. "We can't do this alone." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. She dialed the emergency number, her voice shaky as she explained the situation. The dispatcher assured her that a search and rescue team would be dispatched immediately, but the thought of waiting any longer was unbearable. Duke led Emily through the forest, his keen senses guiding him towards safety. The little girl stumbled often, her small legs catching on roots and rocks, but the Labrador was always there to steady her. When she grew too tired to walk, Duke stopped and nudged her onto his back, his strong body carrying her with ease. Emily clung to him, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. She felt safer than she had in hours, the warmth of his fur a stark contrast to the cold, unyielding forest. As they moved through the trees, Duke's sharp nose picked up another scent: smoke. It was faint but unmistakable, the sign of a human presence nearby. The Labrador quickened his pace, his determination unwavering. Emily clung to him, her eyes wide as the trees began to thin. In the distance, the faint glow of a campfire flickered through the underbrush. Duke barked sharply, his deep voice carrying through the stillness of the forest. The sound startled the campers, who turned toward the source of the noise. A man and a woman, both dressed in hiking gear, stood up from their folding chairs, their eyes widening as they saw the Labrador emerge from the woods with a little girl on his back. "Oh my God," the woman gasped, rushing forward. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Emily nodded weakly, her voice too faint to respond. The man crouched down beside Duke, his hands hovering over the dog as he tried to understand what had happened. Duke barked again, his tail wagging as if to say, "Help her." The hikers sprang into action, wrapping Emily in a warm blanket and offering her a bottle of water. The woman held her close, whispering soothing words as the little girl's tears finally began to subside. The man examined Duke, his eyes filled with gratitude as he realized the Labrador had likely saved the child's life. As Emily rested by the campfire, the hikers radioed for help, relaying the situation to the search and rescue team. Duke sat close to Emily, his body a steadfast presence of comfort and protection. The little girl reached out to stroke his fur, her tiny fingers tracing the soft golden strands. "Thank you, doggy," she whispered, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You're my hero." Duke responded with a soft whine, his eyes warm and gentle. The bond between them was undeniable, a connection forged in the most harrowing of circumstances. The Labrador had become her guardian angel, guiding her through the darkest moments and bringing her back into the light. Night was starting to descend upon the forest when the hikers' radio finally crackled with the voice of the search and rescue team. They gave the hikers precise coordinates for their location and assured them a team was on the way. Emily sat wrapped in a blanket, her head resting on Duke's warm side as the hikers kept a vigilant watch. The glow of their campfire cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, making the dense forest feel slightly less menacing. Duke, despite the relative safety of the camp, remained alert. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, and his nose flared as he sniffed the air. Every once in a while, he would glance down at Emily, ensuring she was still safe and calm. The bond between the child and the dog had solidified in those hours they spent together, and now he felt as though she were part of his pack. Emily, for her part, seemed more relaxed now that she was no longer alone in the vast forest. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, but kept one small hand resting on Duke's back as if drawing strength from his presence. "Doggy," she whispered softly, her voice full of sleepy affection. "I think you're magic." Duke let out a quiet huff of air, as if he understood her completely. His tail wagged gently, the only indication of his pride in her words. Miles away, Sarah and Tom stood near the edge of the forest, surrounded by volunteers and rescue workers. Flashlights flickered in the growing darkness, and the hum of two-way radios punctuated the air. Sarah clutched a scarf Emily had left behind at the picnic, holding it tightly against her chest as if it were her lifeline. Tom paced restlessly, his jaw clenched, and his hands balled into fists. "Why haven't they found her yet?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking as she turned to one of the rescue workers. "It's been hours." The man placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am. The forest is vast, but we've got teams covering every sector. We'll find her." Tom, overhearing the exchange, let out a frustrated sigh. "She's 5 years old," he said, his voice low and strained. "She's out there in the dark, alone and scared." But just as despair began to creep into their hearts, one of the rescue workers approached with a radio in hand. "We just got a call from a group of hikers," he said, a spark of hope in his voice. "They found a little girl. Matches your description of Emily. And they mentioned a dog." A dog? Sarah asked, confused. We don't have a dog. The rescue worker shrugged. Apparently, the dog found her. They're holding her at their campsite until we can reach them. Tom grabbed Sarah's hand, his eyes filled with hope for the first time in hours. Let's go, he said. We need to get to her. The rescue team set off immediately, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they followed the coordinates given by the hikers. Sarah and Tom walked closely behind, their hearts pounding with a mix of relief and anticipation. They couldn't imagine what Emily had been through or how a dog had come to her aid, but none of that mattered now. All they cared about was seeing their daughter's face again. Back at the campsite, Emily's eyelids grew heavy. The warmth of the fire and the steady rise and fall of Duke's breathing lulled her into a sense of security she hadn't felt all day. The hikers kept her engaged with gentle questions, asking about her favorite colors and toys, but they could see the exhaustion taking over. You're a brave little girl, the woman said softly, brushing a strand of hair out of Emily's face. Your parents are going to be so proud of you. Will they be mad at me? Emily asked, her voice small and hesitant. The woman shook her head, her smile gentle. Oh, sweetie, no. They've been looking for you all day. They just want to hold you and make sure you're okay. Emily nodded, her gaze drifting toward Duke. And Doggy will come too, right? The man chuckled. I think he's made it pretty clear he's not leaving your side. Duke wagged his tail at the mention of his new title. He settled more comfortably against the ground, his protective instincts still sharp but his posture more relaxed. The little girl had become his charge, and he wasn't about to abandon her. The sound of approaching voices and the beam of flashlights cutting through the darkness announced the arrival of the rescue team. Emily perked up, her sleepy eyes widening as she recognized two familiar figures among the crowd. Mommy, Daddy, she cried, her small voice breaking with emotion. Sarah and Tom rushed forward, their hearts leaping at the sight of their daughter. Sarah dropped to her knees, wrapping Emily in a tight hug as tears streamed down her face. Tom crouched beside them, his arms encircling both of them as he murmured words of comfort. We were so worried about you, Sarah said, her voice trembling as she pressed kisses to Emily's cheeks. We thought we'd lost you. I'm sorry, Mommy, Emily whispered, burying her face in Sarah's shoulder. I didn't mean to get lost. Tom gently stroked her hair, his voice thick with emotion. You're safe now, sweetheart. That's all that matters. It wasn't until the family pulled back slightly that they noticed Duke sitting patiently nearby, his tail wagging and his eyes fixed on Emily. Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance, their brows furrowed in confusion. Is this the dog they mentioned? Tom asked, his voice tinged with amazement. Emily nodded enthusiastically. This is Doggy. He found me and kept me safe. Sarah knelt down, her eyes filling with gratitude as she reached out to stroke Duke's fur. Thank you, she said softly, her voice breaking. Thank you for bringing her back to us. Duke leaned into her touch, his wagging tail the only sign of his pride. He had done what he was meant to do, and the reunion of the family was all the reward he needed. The rescue team escorted the family and Duke back through the forest, their flashlights lighting the way. Emily rode on Tom's shoulders, her small hands clutching his head as she recounted her adventure. She spoke of chasing the butterfly, getting lost, and how Duke had found her when she was scared and alone. And he let me ride on his back. Emily said excitedly, He's the best doggy ever. Sarah and Tom listened, their hearts swelling with gratitude for the Labrador who had become their daughter's hero. They couldn't imagine how different the outcome might have been without him. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, a small crowd of volunteers and rescue workers had gathered, their faces lighting up with relief and joy at the sight of Emily. Cheers erupted as the little girl was reunited with the people who had spent hours searching for her. Duke, sensing the attention, sat proudly at Emily's side, his tail wagging as if to say, I did my job. News of Emily's rescue and her canine savior spread quickly. The local news station caught wind of the story, and soon reporters were knocking on the Reynolds family's door. Duke became an instant celebrity, his story touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. Emily, too young to fully understand the attention, happily recounted her adventure to anyone who would listen. Doggy saved me, she would say with a bright smile. He's my best friend. For the Reynolds family, Duke became more than just a dog. He was a member of the family, a guardian angel in golden fur. And for Emily, he was the hero who had turned her darkest day into a story of hope and courage. As the weeks passed, the story of Duke and Emily became a legend in the small town. The local newspaper printed an article titled, "Hero Dog Saves Lost Child in Forest Adventure," complete with a photo of Emily hugging Duke tightly. The image captured the hearts of everyone who read it, and soon Duke became a beloved figure in the community. Strangers would stop by the Reynolds house, bringing treats for Duke and small gifts for Emily. The little girl would beam with pride every time someone called her furry friend a hero. Duke, ever humble and unassuming, accepted the attention with wagging tails and gentle nudges. His loyalty to Emily never wavered, and the two were inseparable. At school, Emily's classmates were in awe of her story. During show and tell, she brought in a drawing she'd made of herself riding on Duke's back, surrounded by the trees of the forest. "Doggie's the bravest dog ever," she told the class, her voice full of admiration. "He's not scared of anything." Her teacher smiled warmly. "It sounds like Duke is a very special dog," she said. "And you're a very lucky girl, Emily." But not everyone was as enthusiastic about Duke's newfound fame. Across town, a grumpy old neighbor named Mr. Grayson watched the media frenzy with a scowl. Known for his prickly demeanor and general dislike of animals, Mr. Grayson dismissed the story as exaggerated nonsense. "It's just a dog," he muttered to himself as he read the article in the paper. "People are acting like he cured cancer." Despite his grumbles, Mr. Grayson couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. As much as he disliked dogs, the idea of one navigating the forest and saving a child intrigued him. "Maybe I'll go see what all the fuss is about," he thought begrudgingly. One afternoon, as Emily played with Duke in the front yard, Mr. Grayson shuffled up the driveway. His cane tapped against the pavement, and his sharp eyes took in the scene before him. Duke was lying on his back, his paws in the air as Emily scratched his belly. The sound of her laughter filled the air, a melody of pure joy. "Excuse me," Mr. Grayson called out, his voice gruff. "Is this the dog everyone's been talking about?" Emily looked up, her smile faltering slightly at the sight of the unfamiliar man. "Yes," she said cautiously. "This is Duke." Mr. Grayson approached slowly, his cane clicking with each step. He squinted down at the Labrador, who had rolled over and was now watching the old man with calm curiosity. "So, you're the so-called hero, huh?" Mr. Grayson said, his tone skeptical. Duke wagged his tail politely, his brown eyes warm and unthreatening. He stood up and took a step closer to Mr. Grayson, his movements deliberate and non-confrontational. The old man hesitated, his fingers tightening on the handle of his cane. Emily stepped closer to Duke, her small hand resting on his back. "Duke's not just a hero," she said softly. "He's my best friend." Mr. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Best friend, huh? Well, I suppose he did save you. But that doesn't mean he's some kind of saint." "He is to me," Emily said firmly, her voice gaining confidence. "Duke's the bravest, kindest dog in the whole world." The sincerity in her words caught Mr. Grayson off guard. He looked at the little girl, then at the dog, and for a moment his hardened expression softened. "Well," he said gruffly, "I suppose a dog like that deserves some credit." Over the next few days, Mr. Grayson found himself thinking about Duke more often than he cared to admit. The old man had never been fond of animals, especially dogs. But something about the Labrador's calm demeanor and Emily's unwavering trust in him stirred something deep within Mr. Grayson, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Grayson stood at his window, watching the Reynolds family in their yard. Emily was playing fetch with Duke, her laughter echoing through the neighborhood. The dog's golden coat glowed in the fading light, and Mr. Grayson couldn't help but admire the bond between them. "Maybe dogs aren't so bad," he muttered under his breath, surprising himself with the thought. Meanwhile, Duke's fame continued to grow. A local animal rescue organization reached out to the Reynolds family, asking if Duke could be the face of their new campaign to promote pet adoption. Sarah and Tom, proud of their furry hero, agreed enthusiastically. The campaign featured posters of Duke with the slogan, "Every dog can be a hero, adopt today." Emily loved seeing her best friend's face on the posters around town, and she often pointed them out to anyone who would listen. "That's my Duke," she would say proudly. "He saved me when I was lost." The campaign was a massive success, and the animal rescue organization saw a significant increase in adoptions. Families who had once been hesitant to adopt a dog were inspired by Duke's story, realizing the incredible impact a loyal pet could have. One day, as Emily and Duke were playing in the backyard, Mr. Grayson appeared at the fence. He leaned on his cane, watching the pair with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and hesitation. "Hello, Mr. Grayson," Emily called out cheerfully. "Do you want to meet Duke?" The old man hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure," he said gruffly. "Why not?" Emily opened the gate and gestured for him to come inside. Duke trotted over, his tail wagging as he approached the visitor. Mr. Grayson crouched down slowly, his joints protesting the movement. He reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against Duke's fur. "You're a big fella, aren't you?" Mr. Grayson said, his tone softening. Duke leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly as if savoring the contact. Emily watched with a wide smile, delighted to see her grumpy neighbor warming up to her beloved dog. "See," she said, "Duke's the best." Mr. Grayson chuckled, a rare sound that surprised even himself. "I think you might be right, kid." As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Grayson began visiting more often. He and Duke formed an unlikely bond, the old man finding solace in the dog's calm presence. Emily was thrilled to see her neighbor smile more, and she often invited him to join their games in the yard. For Mr. Grayson, Duke became more than just a dog. He became a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still kindness and loyalty to be found. The Labrador had not only saved Emily's life, but it also brought new light into Mr. Grayson's world. As the bond between Mr. Grayson and Duke deepened, the old man began to soften in ways that surprised everyone, especially himself. He would often come by the Reynolds home, cane in hand, and sit in the backyard while Emily played fetch with Duke. Sometimes he even joined in, throwing the ball as far as his aging arm could manage. Emily loved these moments. She would giggle as Mr. Grayson pretended to argue with Duke over who got to keep the ball. Though Duke always won, his wagging tail a clear signal of his victory. Sarah and Tom watched from the kitchen window, marveling at the transformation in their once grumpy neighbor. "He's like a different person," Sarah said one afternoon as she dried the dishes. "I never thought I'd see him smile, let alone laugh." Tom nodded, his eyes on the backyard scene. "It's amazing what a dog can do." Duke's not just a hero to Emily, he's a hero to Grayson too. One Saturday morning, Emily came bounding into the kitchen, her face alight with excitement. "Mommy, Daddy," she called. "Can we take Duke to the park?" Mr. Grayson said he'd come too. Sarah and Tom exchanged a smile. "That sounds like a great idea," Sarah said. "Let's pack a picnic and make a day of it." An hour later, the group set off for the park. Emily held Duke's leash, her small hand firm and steady as she guided her beloved dog. Mr. Grayson walked beside them, his cane tapping rhythmically against the sidewalk. Sarah and Tom followed with a picnic basket in hand, their hearts full at the sight of their daughter and her unlikely friend. The park was bustling with activity. Children ran through the playground, their laughter filling the air, while families spread blankets on the grass. Duke's tail wagged furiously as he took in the sights and sounds, his keen senses alert to everything around him. Emily led him to an open field, where she let him off the leash. "Go, Duke," she said, throwing a tennis ball as far as she could. The Labrador took off like shot, his powerful legs propelling him forward. He returned moments later, the ball clutched proudly in his jaws. Mr. Grayson watched from a nearby bench, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "That dog's got more energy than I've had in 50 years, he said. Emily giggled. "Duke's the best, isn't he?" The old man nodded. "He sure is, kid. He sure is." As the day wore on, the group enjoyed their picnic under the shade of a large oak tree. Emily chattered happily about school and her plans for the summer, while Duke lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws. Mr. Grayson listened intently, his gruff exterior softening further with each passing moment. But as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, a commotion broke out near the playground. A young boy had climbed too high on the jungle gym and was now clinging to the top, his face pale with fear. His parents stood below, their voices frantic as they tried to coax him down. The boy's cries grew louder, and the crowd around him thickened. Emily stood up, her eyes wide with concern. "Mommy, that boy needs help," she said. Before anyone could respond, Duke sprang to his feet. His ears perked up, and his body tensed as he assessed the situation. Without hesitation, he took off toward the playground, his powerful legs eating up the distance in seconds. The parents turned as the Labrador approached, their expressions shifting from panic to confusion. Duke stopped at the base of the jungle gym, his eyes fixed on the boy above. He let out a series of sharp barks, as if to say, "It's okay. I'm here." The boy looked down, his tear-streaked face softening slightly at the sight of the dog. "Doggy," he whispered, his small voice barely audible. Duke barked again, his tail wagging gently. He circled the base of the jungle gym, his sharp eyes scanning for a way to help. Finally, he stopped and looked up at the boy, his body language calm and reassuring. "Hold on, buddy," Tom said as he and Mr. Grayson reached the scene. "We're going to get you down." Tom began climbing the jungle gym, his movements careful and deliberate. Duke stayed at the base, his presence a steady source of comfort for the boy. By the time Tom reached the top, the boy had stopped crying, his fear replaced by a tentative trust in the people and dog below. With Tom's guidance, the boy slowly made his way down the structure. When his feet finally touched the ground, he ran straight to Duke, throwing his arms around the Labrador's neck. "Thank you, doggy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The boy's parents rushed forward, their gratitude spilling over in a flurry of words and hugs. "Thank you so much," the mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know what to do." Duke, ever humble, accepted the attention with a wagging tail and a soft whine. He had done what he was meant to do, and that was enough for him. The incident at the park only solidified Duke's reputation as a hero. News of his actions spread quickly, and soon the Labrador was the talk of the town once again. Emily couldn't have been prouder of her best friend, and she told anyone who would listen about how Duke had saved not just her, but now another child as well. Mr. Grayson, too, found himself in the spotlight. Reporters wanted to interview him about his newfound bond with the Reynolds family and their remarkable dog. At first, he was reluctant, his gruff nature making him wary of attention. But eventually, he agreed, his heart softening further as he spoke about the impact Duke had had on his life. "Before Duke, I didn't think much of dogs," he admitted during one interview. "But this one's different. He's got a way of bringing people together, of making you believe in the good in the world." As the weeks turned into months, life in the Reynolds household settled into a happy rhythm. Duke remained the heart of their family, his presence a constant source of joy and comfort. Emily continued to dote on him, and even Mr. Grayson became a regular fixture in their lives, joining them for dinners and outings. One evening, as the family gathered in the backyard, Sarah turned to Tom with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I think Duke has taught us all something important." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What's that?" Sarah smiled. "That even in the darkest moments, there's always a light. And sometimes, that light comes in the form of a dog with a wagging tail and a big heart." Tom nodded, his gaze falling on Duke, who was playing tug-of-war with Emily. "You're right," he said. "Duke's not just a dog. He's family." The summer months brought even more opportunities for Duke to shine as a beacon of loyalty and courage in the Reynolds family's lives. Emily's confidence grew as she spent more time outdoors with her golden protector, exploring the world with an innocence only a child could muster. The town seemed to embrace Duke as their unofficial mascot, and his presence brought smiles wherever he went. One weekend, the town organized a community event at the park, aptly named Hero Day. It was a celebration of local heroes, and Duke was the star of the show. Posters of the Labrador adorned the park's entrance, and a small stage was set up where families could hear stories of bravery from townspeople who had made a difference. Emily was thrilled to attend, her excitement bubbling over as she dressed Duke in a red bandana with the word hero embroidered on it. "You look perfect, Duke," she said, kissing his head. "Everyone's going to see how amazing you are." When they arrived at the park, the crowd erupted in cheers at the sight of Duke. Children ran up to pet him, their faces lighting up with joy as he wagged his tail and licked their hands. Parents shook hands with Tom and Sarah, offering heartfelt thanks for sharing their dog's inspiring story. On stage, the event organizers shared Duke's story, recounting the day he rescued Emily from the forest. As they spoke, Emily held Duke's leash, her face beaming with pride. She leaned over and whispered, "They're talking about you, Duke. Everyone loves you." The Labrador looked up at her with his warm brown eyes, his tail thumping against the stage floor. He didn't understand the words, but he could feel the love and admiration radiating from the crowd. After the event, the Reynolds family was approached by a woman named Margaret, who introduced herself as the director of a regional animal therapy program. Margaret explained that her organization trained dogs to visit hospitals, schools, and nursing homes, bringing comfort to people in need. "We've heard so much about Duke," Margaret said, her voice filled with warmth. He has such a gentle spirit and an incredible story. Have you ever considered enrolling him in a therapy program?" Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance, intrigued by the idea. "He's always been wonderful with people," Sarah said, "and he loves kids." Emily, overhearing the conversation, tugged on her mom's sleeve. "What's a therapy dog, Mommy?" she asked. Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, placing a hand on her shoulder. "A therapy dog is a very special dog that helps people feel better," she explained. "They visit people who might be sick or lonely and make them happy." Emily's eyes widened with excitement. Duke could do that. He makes everyone happy. Tom smiled. "It does sound like something Duke would be great at. What do you think, boy?" Duke tilted his head at the sound of his name, his tail wagging as if to say, "I'm ready for anything." Over the next few weeks, Duke began training to become a certified therapy dog. Margaret visited the Reynolds home regularly, teaching Duke the skills he would need to interact with patients and children. The Labrador excelled in every aspect of the training, his natural gentleness and intelligence shining through. Emily loved being part of the process, helping Duke practice his commands and cheering him on every step of the way. "You're the best dog in the world," she told him one afternoon as they worked on his leash walking skills. "Everyone's going to love you even more." Finally, the day came for Duke's first therapy visit. Margaret accompanied the family to a local children's hospital, where Duke would meet young patients for the first time. As they walked through the hospital's brightly colored hallways, Emily held Duke's leash tightly, her heart swelling with pride. The first patient they visited was a boy named Liam, who was recovering from surgery. Liam's face lit up when Duke entered the room, his small hands reaching out to pet the Labrador's soft fur. "Hi, Duke," Liam said, his voice filled with wonder. "You're a really good dog." Duke wagged his tail, leaning gently into Liam's touch. The boy giggled, his eyes sparkling with happiness. For a moment, the sterile hospital room felt warm and full of life. As they moved from room to room, Duke brought smiles to every child he met. He listened patiently as they told him stories, his calm presence soothing their fears and brightening their spirits. Emily watched with wide eyes, her admiration for Duke growing with every interaction. "Mommy," she whispered as they left the hospital that afternoon. "Duke's a real-life superhero." Sarah smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "He really is," she agreed. "And you're his biggest fan." As Duke's therapy work continued, the Reynolds family noticed how much the experience was enriching not only the lives of the people he met, but also their own. They saw the profound impact a dog's love and loyalty could have, and it deepened their appreciation for their four-legged friend. Even Mr. Grayson got involved, volunteering to drive the Reynolds family to therapy visits and watching proudly as Duke worked his magic. The old man had become a fixture in their lives, his once gruff exterior replaced by a warmth they never thought they'd see. "I never thought I'd say this," Mr. Grayson admitted one day as he watched Duke comfort a group of children at a library reading event. "But that dog's got a heart bigger than most people I've met." Emily grinned. "That's why he's the best dog ever." As the seasons changed and the leaves turned golden, the Reynolds family reflected on how much their lives had transformed since the day Duke found Emily in the forest. What had started as a terrifying ordeal had become a story of hope, courage, and connection. Duke had not only saved Emily's life, but it also brought their family closer together and touched the hearts of countless people in their community. One crisp autumn evening, as the family sat around a crackling fire in their backyard, Emily looked at Duke, who was curled up beside her with his head resting on her lap. "Mommy," she said softly, "do you think Duke knew I was lost that day?" Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I think he did, sweetheart. Dogs have a way of knowing things that we can't always explain. And Duke knew you needed him." Emily stroked Duke's fur, her small hand moving gently over his golden coat. "I think he's my guardian angel," she said, her voice full of conviction. "He's always watching out for me." Tom reached over and ruffled Emily's hair. "I think you're right," he said. "Duke's more than just a dog. He's family." As the fire crackled and the stars began to twinkle above, the Reynolds family sat together, their hearts full of gratitude for the dog who had changed their lives forever. Duke, ever humble, closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged.